A young slave is ordered to clean the master's bedroom. But when Thomas enters, he finds the wife waiting alone. Their eyes lock, and in that moment, everything changes. What happens next isn't just forbidden. It's dangerous enough to get them both killed. As Thomas steps into that lavish room, he has no idea that this encounter will force him to choose between safety and something far more precious than freedom. Thomas had learned to keep his eyes down. At 19, he'd survived on the Caldwell plantation by becoming invisible, working from sunrise to sunset in the fields, avoiding the overseer's whip, and never, ever drawing attention to himself. The other slaves called him Ghost, for how he seemed to vanish whenever Master Caldwell appeared. But today, everything changed. "Boy, Master wants you at the house," the overseer shouted across the cotton field, his voice cutting through the humid Georgia air. "Now!" Thomas's heart hammered against his ribs. No field slave was ever called to the main house unless someone was about to be punished. His mind raced through everything he'd done in the past week, searching desperately for his offense. At the grand house, Matilda, the head house servant, grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Listen carefully," she whispered, her eyes wide with warning. "Master's gone to town. The mistress wants you to clean their bedroom. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't look her in the eye. And boy," her fingers dug deeper, "don't touch anything that ain't a dust rag or broom." As Thomas climbed the sweeping staircase, each step felt like walking toward his own execution. Field slaves didn't clean bedrooms. Field slaves didn't enter the master's private quarters. Something wasn't right. But as Thomas stood at the threshold of that ornate bedroom, he had no idea that the woman waiting inside would offer him something far more dangerous than freedom. Thomas knocked softly on the heavy oak door, his knuckles barely making a sound. When no answer came, he knocked again, louder this time, the wood cool and smooth beneath his calloused fingertips. "Enter," called a woman's voice from within, the single word carrying an authority that made his spine straighten. He pushed the door open slowly, keeping his eyes fixed on the polished wooden floor as he stepped inside. The room smelled of lavender and beeswax, so different from the earthy scents of the slave quarters. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. This was a world he didn't belong in, a world of fine furniture, silk bedding, and porcelain figurines that cost more than his life was worth. "You must be Thomas." His head snapped up involuntarily at the sound of his name. Eleanor Caldwell sat by the window, a leather-bound book open in her lap, sunlight streaming through the lace curtains behind her. She was younger than he'd realized, perhaps only a few years older than himself, with chestnut hair pinned loosely at her neck and eyes the color of amber honey that studied him with unsettling directness. Her blue dress, simple by the standards of plantation mistresses but still finer than anything Thomas had ever touched, rustled softly as she shifted in her chair. "Yes, ma'am," he managed, quickly lowering his gaze again, focusing on the intricate pattern of the Persian rug beneath his worn boots. He was acutely aware of the dirt under his fingernails, the sweat staining his rough cotton shirt, the way he didn't belong in this sanctuary of wealth. "Look at me, please." Her voice was soft but firm, leaving no room for refusal. Thomas hesitated, Matilda's warnings echoing in his mind. Looking a white woman in the eye could get a man like him killed. He'd seen it happen to others, men who forgot their place even for a moment. The memory of Jacob's hanging 3 summers ago flashed through his mind, a brutal reminder of the consequences of such transgressions. "I said, look at me. No one will know." There was something in her tone, not quite kindness but an absence of cruelty that was rare enough to be noticeable. Slowly, he raised his eyes to meet hers, half expecting to see the flash of outrage that would signal his doom. But Mrs. Caldwell's face held none of the contempt he was accustomed to seeing from the master. Instead, there was something else, curiosity perhaps, or calculation. Her gaze was steady, assessing, as if she were trying to read something written on his soul. "Do you know why I asked for you specifically?" She tilted her head slightly, a strand of hair falling loose from its pin. Thomas's throat went dry. His heart hammered so loudly he was certain she must hear it. "No, ma'am." The words came out hoarse, barely audible even in the quiet room. She closed her book and set it aside, her fingers lingering on the embossed cover for a moment. "I've watched you in the fields. You're different from the others. You observe. You think." She stood and walked toward him, her skirts whispering against the floor, stopping closer than propriety would allow, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of rosewater on her skin. "And I believe you can read." The accusation, for that's what it was, hit Thomas like a physical blow. Reading was forbidden to slaves. Even the suspicion could mean the lash, or worse. His mouth went dry, and for a terrible moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room seemed to contract around him, the fine furnishing suddenly menacing. "I don't—" He began to protest, the words sticking in his throat like cotton seeds. "Don't lie to me," she interrupted, but her voice remained soft, almost intimate in the quiet room. "I saw you looking at the newspaper that blew across the yard last month. Your eyes followed the lines. Your lips moved. No one else noticed, but I did." Her eyes never left his face, searching for the truth she already seemed certain of. Thomas felt the room spin slightly. If she told the master, it would be the whipping post at best. At worst, he'd seen men sold away from their families for less. His hands trembled slightly at his sides, and he clenched them into fists to hide the tremor. "The others think I'm just another bored plantation wife," Eleanor continued, her voice dropping even lower, forcing Thomas to lean in slightly to hear her words. "My husband believes I spend my days with needlepoint and gossip. No one suspects that I have thoughts of my own." A bitter smile crossed her lips, there and gone in an instant. "Just as no one suspects that a field slave might have taught himself to read." She turned away abruptly and walked to a painting on the wall, a pastoral scene of rolling hills that Thomas had always admired from a distance during his rare glimpses into the main house. The colors reminded him of stories his mother had told him of the green mountains far to the north, places he would never see. To his astonishment, Eleanor reached up and swung the painting forward on concealed hinges, revealing a small hidden compartment in the wall behind it. The compartment was lined with dark velvet and contained several books, a stack of papers, and what looked like letters tied with string. "My husband would beat me if he knew about this," she said matter-of-factly, her back still to Thomas. "He believes women's minds are too fragile for serious reading. Philosophy, politics, science, these are not for ladies." She glanced over her shoulder at him, her expression unreadable. "We each have our forbidden knowledge, it seems." Thomas stood frozen, uncertain whether to flee or stay. This encounter had veered so far from anything he could have anticipated that he had no map to guide him. The mistress was sharing secrets with him, dangerous secrets that could destroy them both. "I need someone I can trust," Eleanor continued, turning to face him fully again, her voice barely above a whisper now. "Someone intelligent. Someone who understands what it means to keep secrets." She paused, studying his face. "Someone who has everything to lose, just as I do." Thomas swallowed hard. "Why me, ma'am?" he finally managed to ask, the question escaping before he could think better of it. Eleanor smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face, making her look younger, almost girlish. "Because you looked at that newspaper like it was water in the desert. Because I've seen you watching, listening, when others think no one is paying attention." She took a step closer. "Because I think you want more than this life has given you. As do I." What Thomas couldn't know was that Eleanor Caldwell had been watching him for months, calculating, planning. Her life as the trophy wife of a cruel plantation owner had become unbearable. a gilded cage that grew smaller with each passing day, and now she had found someone who might help her escape it, someone with the intelligence and courage she needed. Her plans for him went far beyond a simple conversation. And in this moment, standing in the master's bedroom with the mistress's secrets laid bare before him, Thomas stood at a crossroads. The path of safety lay in backing away, forgetting what he'd seen, returning to the fields and the relative anonymity that had protected him thus far. But as Eleanor held his gaze, something stirred within him, something dangerous and hopeful and terrifying all at once. The promise of something more, something worth risking everything for. For several heartbeats, Thomas remained motionless, caught between fear and fascination as Eleanor carefully closed the hidden compartment, the painting settling back into place with a soft click. The pastoral scene now seemed to mock him with its peaceful imagery, a world of freedom so contrary to the dangerous reality closing in around him. The distant hills in the painting, bathed in golden sunlight, represented everything he could never have, or so he had always believed until this moment. "Ma'am, I should start cleaning," he finally said, desperate to return to the safety of mundane tasks. He reached for the broom he'd brought, his fingers trembling slightly. The wooden handle, worn smooth by years of use, offered a tangible connection to the predictable life he'd carefully constructed, a life that was now teetering on the edge of something unknown. "The cleaning can wait," Eleanor replied, moving to sit at her dressing table. The mirror reflected her face, composed yet alert as she adjusted a pearl earring with practiced ease. She gestured to a spot near her. "Come closer, Thomas. I don't bite." Her reflection watched him, those amber eyes tracking his hesitation. The attempted humor fell flat in the tension-filled room. Nevertheless, Thomas approached, keeping a respectful distance that was still closer than he'd ever stood to the mistress of the plantation. From here, he could see the fine details of her face, the light freckles across her nose that she tried to hide with powder, the small scar near her temple partially concealed by her hair, the slight crease between her brows that spoke of worries beyond what a woman of her station should carry. The mantel clock ticked loudly in the silence, each second marking time in a room where something momentous was unfolding. Outside, birds called to one another, oblivious to the human drama within these walls. Thomas could hear the distant sounds of the plantation, a wagon rolling over gravel, someone chopping wood, the overseer's voice barking orders, the normal rhythm of a world that suddenly felt anything but normal. "Do you know what my husband does in Charleston when he's away on business?" she asked, her voice hardening slightly. Her fingers played with a silver hairbrush, turning it over and over as she spoke. Thomas remained silent, knowing any answer would be dangerous. He studied the pattern on the rug beneath his feet, memorizing the intricate design as if it might somehow save him from the conversation he was being pulled into. "He visits his mistress," Eleanor continued, answering her own question. "A free woman of color who lives in a house he bought for her on Meeting Street. She has a beauty mark here." She touched a spot beside her mouth. "And he's given her jewelry that belonged to my grandmother." Her voice remained steady, but her knuckles whitened around the hairbrush. "He thinks I don't know." She laughed, a brittle sound devoid of humor that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. "He also thinks I don't know about the ledgers he keeps in his study, the ones that show how he's been stealing from my father's inheritance to me. Thousands of dollars, siphoned away year after year, while he tells me we must economize." Thomas felt his chest tighten. These were secrets no slave should hear, information that could get him killed simply for knowing it. The weight of her words pressed down on him, making it difficult to breathe in the lavender-scented air. His grandmother had taught him that knowledge was power, but on a plantation, certain knowledge was more dangerous than handling a copperhead. "Ma'am, please," he began, but Eleanor cut him off with a sharp gesture, the silver hairbrush catching the sunlight as it moved through the air. "I'm telling you this so you understand that my husband is not the man he pretends to be. His reputation, his standing in society, it's all built on lies." She turned to face Thomas fully, setting down the brush with deliberate care. "The same man who whipped your friend Daniel last month for allegedly stealing food is himself a thief on a grand scale. The same man who preaches about Christian virtue from his pew every Sunday commits adultery without remorse." Her eyes flashed with a cold anger. "And I intend to expose those lies, but I need help." The air seemed to leave the room. Thomas stood perfectly still, understanding with terrible clarity what she was asking. His pulse thudded in his ears, drowning out the ticking clock, the birdsong, everything except Eleanor Caldwell's next words. "There are papers in his study," Eleanor continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, though they were alone. She rose from her seat and moved to the window, checking the grounds below before drawing the curtain partially closed. "Letters and documents that prove his embezzlement from my trust. Correspondence about arms shipments to rebel groups that would see him hanged for treason. I need copies made." She turned back to Thomas, her face half in shadow now. "There are also records of his business dealings. The true records, not the ones he shows to his partners. Records that detail the sale of human beings, including children separated from their mothers." Her eyes held his. "Including your sister, Lily." The mention of his sister's name hit Thomas like a physical blow. Lily had been sold 6 years ago when she was just 11. Master Caldwell had claimed she was going to a good family in Virginia, who wanted a house girl, but Thomas had never believed it. He'd never known what really happened to her. "How do you—" he started, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I know many things people think I don't," Eleanor said. "I know that your mother taught you your letters before she died. I know you can read the newspaper when you think no one is watching. And I know that you've never stopped looking for information about your sister." Thomas felt exposed, as if she had peeled back his skin to reveal everything beneath. He'd been so careful, so cautious, and yet this woman had seen through him completely. "And you want me to make these copies," Thomas said, not a question but a statement of the obvious, terrible truth. His mind raced with the implications, the danger, and, yes, the possibility. Eleanor nodded, a strand of chestnut hair coming loose and falling across her face. She tucked it back absently. "You can read. I suspect you can write as well. I've arranged for my husband to be away for 3 days next week. The house staff will be given the evening off, a special treat from the mistress while the master is away." Her eyes never left his. "That will give us time." Thomas's mind raced. The risk was unimaginable. If caught, he would face torture before death, made an example to any slave who dared step above their station. He'd seen it happen before. Men strung up, their backs flayed open, left to hang as warnings. His palms grew damp at the thought. And yet, what would be in it for me? The question surprised even himself, spoken aloud before he could stop it. He half expected her to call for the overseer immediately, to have him dragged away for such insolence. Instead of anger at his impertinence, Eleanor smiled, a calculating expression that reminded Thomas that this woman, for all her seeming vulnerability, was dangerous in her own right. She was a Northerner by birth, the daughter of a wealthy Boston merchant who had married into Southern aristocracy. Thomas had overheard the house slaves talking about how she had never quite fit in, never fully embraced the plantation mistress role. "Freedom," she said simply, the word hanging in the air between them. "Once I have what I need, I'll be leaving this place. My father's family in Boston will take me in. I can arrange papers for you, documentation stating you're a free man. Money enough to start a new life in the North." She paused, then added, "And information about Lily. I believe I know where she was sold. With freedom and resources, you might find her." Freedom. The word hung in the air between them, shimmering like a mirage. Thomas had dreamed of it every night since he was old enough to understand what it meant to be enslaved, but he'd never dared hope it might actually be possible. And Lily, the possibility of finding his sister, of fulfilling the promise he'd made to his dying mother to look after her, sent a surge of longing through him so powerful it was almost painful. "And if I refuse?" he asked, needing to understand all the terms of this devil's bargain. His eyes darted to the door, suddenly aware of how vulnerable they both were. If anyone overheard this conversation— Eleanor's expression didn't change. "Then you return to the fields, and we never speak of this again. I'll find another way." She paused, smoothing her skirts with practiced composure. "But I think you won't refuse. I've seen the hunger in your eyes when you look toward the north. The same hunger I feel." She moved to her jewelry box and removed a small locket. Opening it, she revealed a tiny portrait of a young girl with dark eyes and a serious expression. "My daughter. She lives with my sister in Massachusetts. My husband doesn't allow me to see her. Says she's better off being raised by proper northern relatives than by a mother with nervous tendencies." Bitterness laced her words. "It's been 3 years since I've held her. Every day in this house is another day away from her." Thomas hadn't known the mistress had a child. The revelation humanized her in a way that made him uncomfortable. It was easier to think of the Whites as simply masters and oppressors, not as people with their own sorrows and longings. He thought of his mother, buried in the small slave cemetery 3 years past, of his younger sister, sold away to another plantation when he was 14, of the countless indignities and cruelties he'd endured and witnessed, and he thought of freedom, real freedom, not just dreams. "When would we begin?" he asked finally, the words feeling like stepping off a cliff into open air. Relief flickered briefly across Eleanor's face before her composed mask returned. "I'll have Matilda send for you to clean the windows in the study tomorrow. That will give you a chance to familiarize yourself with the room's layout. The real work begins when my husband leaves for Charleston on Tuesday." She walked to the window again and pulled the curtain aside slightly, checking the grounds. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn. In the distance, field hands were making their way back from the far cotton fields, bent figures moving slowly after a day of backbreaking labor. "We'll need to be careful about timing," she continued, letting the curtain fall back into place. "My husband's study is at the far end of the west wing. It's isolated, which works in our favor, but we'll need to establish a reason for you to be there regularly without arousing suspicion." Thomas nodded, already calculating risks and possibilities. "The window frames in that wing need recaulking. I could be assigned to that task. It would take several days to complete properly." Eleanor looked at him with new appreciation. "You think quickly?" "Yes, that would work." She stood and moved to her escritoire, a delicate piece of furniture inlaid with mother-of-pearl. She removed a small key from a hidden drawer, its brass surface dull with age. "This opens his private cabinet. Memorize where everything is placed. He notices if items are disturbed. He's methodical to the point of obsession." As Thomas took the key, his fingers brushed against hers. The contact, brief and accidental, sent an unexpected jolt through him, a reminder of how forbidden this interaction was. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, suggesting she'd felt it too. For a moment, neither moved, the key suspended between them like a physical manifestation of their conspiracy. "This is dangerous for both of us," she said, withdrawing her hand quickly. "If we're caught—" "I know the risks," Thomas interrupted, surprising himself again with his boldness. The key felt impossibly heavy in his palm, a weight far beyond its physical presence. "I've lived with risk every day of my life." Eleanor studied him for a long moment, as if seeing him truly for the first time. The afternoon light caught the gold flecks in her eyes, making them appear almost luminous. "Yes, I suppose you have." Her voice had softened, carrying something that might have been respect. She moved toward the door, signaling the end of their conversation. "You should actually clean the room now. Appearances must be maintained." Thomas slipped the key into the inner pocket of his worn shirt, close to his skin where it would be safe. He picked up the broom and began sweeping. the familiar motion at odds with the tumult of his thoughts. The floor was already spotless. He wondered if anyone had actually been in this room before him today, or if the entire scenario had been orchestrated by Eleanor Caldwell. As he worked, his mind raced with possibilities and dangers. If he succeeded, freedom awaited, the chance to live as a man, not property, the chance to find Lily. But if he failed, Thomas had no illusions about what would happen. Master Caldwell was known for his creative cruelty toward slaves who displeased him. Eleanor paused at the doorway, her hand resting lightly on the frame. "Thomas," she said softly, causing him to look up. "Trust no one with this, not even those you consider friends. On a plantation, survival often means betrayal." She hesitated, then added in an even lower voice, "There's a free black man in town, Solomon Pike. He runs the cooperage near the wharf. If something goes wrong, if I'm not able to help you, go to him. Tell him the mockingbird still sings. He'll understand." With that warning, she was gone, the rustle of her skirts fading down the hallway, leaving Thomas alone with a broom in his hands, a stolen key in his pocket, and the dangerous seed of hope taking root in his heart. He moved to the window, ostensibly to clean it, and gazed out at the plantation that had been his prison for 19 years. The fields stretched to the horizon, cotton plants in neat rows, the white bolls beginning to show. Beyond them lay swampland, then the river, and beyond that, freedom, a world he had never seen but had imagined 1,000 times. What he couldn't know, was that Eleanor Caldwell's plans were far more complex than she'd revealed, and that he was but one piece in a game where every player had secrets to protect and lies to maintain. He couldn't know that even now, eyes were watching, ears were listening, and the dangerous dance he had just begun had steps he couldn't possibly anticipate. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting the room in amber light, Thomas made his decision. He would help Eleanor Caldwell. He would copy the documents. He would risk everything for the chance at freedom. And perhaps, just perhaps, he would live to see those distant hills that had always seemed as unreachable as the stars themselves. The next morning dawned with a heavy mist clinging to the fields, shrouding the plantation in an ethereal gray that seemed fitting for the clandestine path Thomas had chosen. He rose before the others, slipping out of the cramped cabin he shared with 4 other men, careful not to wake them. Their rhythmic breathing continued undisturbed as he quietly closed the door behind him. Outside, the world was still and silent except for the distant crow of a rooster and the soft dripping of dew from the eaves. Thomas took a moment to breathe deeply, filling his lungs with the cool morning air. It tasted different somehow, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something he had long thought extinguished: hope. He made his way to the well, drawing water to wash his face. The cold shock against his skin helped clear the remnants of a fitful night's sleep. He had dreamed of Lily, of freedom, of Eleanor Caldwell's amber eyes watching him from shadows. He had also dreamed of chains and whips and graves with no markers. His future balanced on a knife's edge, and he knew it. "You're up early," came a voice behind him. Thomas turned to find Samuel, the elderly man who tended the master's horses. Samuel had been on the plantation longer than anyone, so long that some of the younger slaves whispered he might have been born there, though Thomas knew that couldn't be true. The plantation itself wasn't that old. "Got assigned to the main house today," Thomas replied, keeping his voice casual. "Window work in the west wing." Samuel's eyes, clouded with cataracts but still sharp with intelligence, studied Thomas's face. "The west wing, huh? That's the master's domain." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Be careful there, boy. Them walls got ears." Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Did Samuel suspect something? Or was this just the general caution of an old man who had survived by keeping his head down? "Just fixing windows," Thomas said with a shrug, forcing a smile. Nothing to worry about. Samuel held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded slowly. Sure. Just windows. He turned to go, then paused. You know, your daddy was good with his hands, too. Could fix just about anything. It was the first time Samuel had ever mentioned Thomas's father, who had been sold away before Thomas was old enough to remember him. Before Thomas could respond, Samuel was shuffling away, disappearing into the mist like a ghost. The encounter left Thomas unsettled, wondering how much the old man really saw and understood. He resolved to be more careful, more vigilant as he moved through the day. By mid-morning, Thomas had been summoned to the main house as planned. Matilda, the head house slave, met him at the servants' entrance with a scowl that didn't reach her eyes. Matilda was in her 40s, with a no-nonsense demeanor that commanded respect among the other slaves. "Mistress says you're to work on the windows in the master's study," she said, her voice carrying just the right note of annoyance for anyone who might be listening. But as she turned to lead him through the house, she gave him a quick, searching look that made him wonder if she, too, was part of whatever game Eleanor was playing. The main house was unusually quiet. Thomas knew from the kitchen gossip that Master Caldwell was in town for the day, meeting with his business partners. Most of the house staff were busy with laundry or food preparation, their activities centered in the east wing. Matilda led him to the study door, knocked once and opened it without waiting for a response. "The window boy, ma'am," she announced, then stepped aside to let Thomas enter. Eleanor sat at her husband's massive mahogany desk, papers spread before her. She wore a simple blue dress today, her hair pulled back severely, giving her a businesslike appearance at odds with the ornamental role plantation wives were expected to play. "Thank you, Matilda. That will be all," she said without looking up. The door closed with a soft click, and Thomas stood awkwardly, his toolbox in hand, waiting for instructions. The study was exactly as he'd imagined it. Walls lined with leather-bound books, hunting trophies mounted above the fireplace, a globe positioned prominently in one corner. It was a room designed to impress, to communicate power and worldliness to visitors. Eleanor finally looked up, her expression unreadable. "We don't have much time," she said without preamble. "My husband will return for dinner. I need to show you what we're looking for." She rose and moved to a bookcase behind the desk. "This appears to be a normal shelf, but—" She pressed a hidden mechanism, and a section of the bookcase swung inward, revealing a small safe. "This is where he keeps his most sensitive documents." Thomas's eyes widened. "Can you open it?" A ghost of a smile crossed Eleanor's face. "I've been watching him enter the combination for 3 years." Her fingers spun the dial with practiced precision. Left to 18, right to 42, left to 7. The lock clicked, and she pulled the door open. Inside were stacks of papers, a leather ledger, and several small boxes. Eleanor removed the ledger and a bundle of letters tied with string. "These contain the evidence we need. The ledger shows the true financial records, including the money he's stolen from my trust. The letters are correspondence with arms dealers supplying Confederate sympathizers." She handed them to Thomas, who took them carefully, acutely aware of their weight, both physical and metaphorical. "I'll need to copy these exactly." Eleanor nodded. "Every word, every number. I prepared a space where you can work undisturbed." She walked to a panel in the wainscoting and pressed it, revealing yet another hidden compartment, this one large enough for a small desk and chair. "My husband doesn't know about this room. It was part of the Underground Railroad before he bought this house. The previous owner showed it to me in secret." Thomas stared in astonishment. The hidden room was small but well-appointed, with a writing desk, an oil lamp, and even a narrow cot against one wall. "How long has this been here?" "Since before the war," Eleanor replied. "It was used to hide runaway slaves on their journey north. Now it will help free another." She gestured to the desk where paper, ink, and quills had been laid out. You can work here safely. The entrance is concealed from both sides." Thomas stepped into the hidden room, feeling the weight of history press in around him. How many others had sheltered here, hearts pounding with the same mixture of fear and hope that now filled his chest? How many had made it to freedom, and how many had been caught? "I've arranged for you to have legitimate reasons to be in this wing for the next 3 days," Eleanor continued. "Window repairs today, floor polishing tomorrow, and bookshelf inventory the day after. Each time, you'll actually perform some of that work, but you'll also continue copying the documents." She handed him a small key. "This is for the servants' entrance on the west side. If you need to come or go without being seen, use that door. I've made sure it won't be locked." Thomas pocketed the key, his fingers brushing against the one she'd given him yesterday. "What about the other house slaves? Won't they notice me coming and going?" "I've taken care of that," Eleanor said with confidence. "Matilda will run interference. She has her own reasons for helping." Before Thomas could ask what those reasons might be, Eleanor continued, "Now, let me show you which documents are most important. We don't have time to copy everything." For the next hour, Eleanor explained the complex web of financial deceit and political conspiracy documented in her husband's papers. Thomas listened carefully, asking questions when necessary, his quick mind absorbing the details. He had always been observant, but now he focused that ability with new intensity, knowing his life depended on missing nothing. As noon approached, Eleanor gathered the papers and returned them to the safe, carefully arranging them exactly as they had been. "My husband will be back soon. You should be working on the windows when he arrives." Thomas nodded and moved to the large windows that overlooked the garden. He began the actual work of recaulking the frames, his hands steady despite the tension coiling in his stomach. Eleanor watched him for a moment, then said quietly, "You'll begin the copying tomorrow. Today, just establish your presence here as legitimate." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Thomas, thank you. I know what I'm asking puts you at terrible risk." He looked up from his work, meeting her gaze directly. "We both have something to gain, ma'am, and something to lose." A shadow crossed her face. "Yes, more than you know." Before he could ask what she meant, she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. Thomas continued his work on the windows, his mind racing with plans and contingencies. He had committed to this dangerous path, but he wasn't going into it blindly. When he gained his freedom, he would need to move quickly. The North was still a long journey away, and even with papers declaring him free, a black man traveling alone faced countless dangers. He thought of Solomon Pike, the free black man Eleanor had mentioned. The mockingbird still sings. What did that mean? Was Pike part of a network that helped escaped slaves? Thomas filed the information away, another piece in the complex puzzle of his potential escape. As he worked, he became aware of voices in the hallway. One of them, the deep, authoritative tone of Master Caldwell himself, returned earlier than expected. Thomas's heart rate quickened, but he kept his movements steady, focusing on the window frame with exaggerated concentration. The study door opened and Charles Caldwell entered, mid-conversation with another man Thomas didn't recognize. Both stopped short at the sight of Thomas. "What is the meaning of this?" Caldwell demanded, his face darkening with anger. "Who authorized you to be in my private study?" Before Thomas could respond, Eleanor appeared in the doorway behind them. "I did, my dear," she said smoothly. "The window frames are rotting, letting in drafts. I noticed it when I came to leave your mail on your desk this morning." She smiled, the perfect picture of a dutiful wife. "I didn't think you'd want to return to a damp study." Caldwell's expression shifted from anger to irritation. "You should have consulted me first, Eleanor. You know I don't like slaves in my study unsupervised." "Of course, darling. How thoughtless of me." Her tone was apologetic, but Thomas caught the flash of defiance in her eyes. I'll have him finished tomorrow when you're present." Caldwell grunted, then turned to his companion. "Come, Harrison. Let's continue our discussion in the drawing room. My wife can have refreshments brought in." He swept out without another glance at Thomas. Eleanor lingered a moment longer. "Continue your work," she said, loud enough for her husband to hear down the hall. Then, in a whisper, barely audible, "Be ready. Tomorrow we begin in earnest." As she left, Thomas returned to the window, his hands steady but his mind whirling with the dangerous dance he had just witnessed. Eleanor Caldwell played her role with convincing skill. The perfect Southern wife, deferential and decorative. Yet beneath that performance lay a calculating mind and a rebellious spirit that matched his own. He resumed working on the window, the repetitive motions providing a strange comfort amidst the chaos. The sun filtered through the glass, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. He could hear the distant sounds of the plantation, a wagon rolling over gravel, the sound of laughter from the kitchen, the cries of children playing outside. Each sound was a reminder of the life he had always known, and how drastically it could change. As he applied the caulk to the window frame, he thought about what he would do if he succeeded in copying the documents. Would he really be able to escape? Would he find Lily? The thought of his sister filled him with both determination and dread. He had to do this, not just for himself, but for her, and for every person who had ever dreamed of freedom. The hours passed slowly, and he lost himself in the work, letting the rhythm of his motions drown out the worries that threatened to overwhelm him. He could feel the weight of the key in his pocket, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Finally, as the afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, he completed the window. He stepped back to admire his work, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. Just as he was about to gather his tools, he heard footsteps approaching. Matilda appeared at the door, her expression serious. "You finished?" she asked, glancing around the room as if assessing whether everything was in order. "Yes, ma'am," Thomas replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "The windows are secure now." "Good," she said, stepping inside. "But you need to be careful around here. I heard whispers that the master is suspicious. He thinks something's off." Thomas's heart sank. "What do you mean?" "Just that he's been keeping an eye on you and on Eleanor," Matilda replied, her voice low. "He doesn't trust her. You need to be on your guard. If he finds out what you're up to, it'll be the end for both of you." Thomas nodded, the gravity of her words settling heavily in his stomach. "I understand." "Good," she said, moving toward the door. "Just remember, if you get in too deep, there are ways to reach me. If you need to discuss anything, I can help. But be careful about what you say and to whom." With that, she slipped out, leaving Thomas alone once more in the study. He stood there, the weight of her warning heavy in his mind. The stakes were higher than he had imagined, and the shadows of danger loomed larger than ever. The sun was low now, casting long shadows across the floor. He quickly gathered his tools, feeling the urgency of time pressing against him. He had to find a way to make this plan work, not just for himself, but for Eleanor and for all those who had suffered in silence. As he made his way to the back entrance, he felt the weight of the hidden documents pressing against his thoughts. Tomorrow would be the beginning of everything, or the end. He had to be ready. That night, as he lay on his cot in the cabin, sleep came slowly, haunted by dreams of freedom mixed with the specter of failure. He tossed and turned, replaying the day's events in his mind, trying to find a way to piece together all the fragments of his plan. When he finally drifted into a restless sleep, he was met by visions of Lily, her laughter echoing in his ears, a reminder of everything he had lost. He vowed to himself that he would not let her memory fade. He would fight for her and for all those who had no voice. The morning would bring new challenges, but he would face them head-on. With hope ignited in his heart and a plan unfolding in his mind, Thomas knew this was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything. Dawn broke with a thunderstorm, rain lashing against the cabin walls as Thomas rose from his restless sleep. The weather matched his mood, turbulent, charged with electricity, and filled with foreboding. He dressed quickly, grateful for the storm that would provide cover for his movements. The overseer rarely ventured out in such weather, giving Thomas a measure of freedom, however brief. As he stepped outside, the rain immediately soaked through his thin shirt. The plantation was transformed by the downpour, buildings blurred by sheets of rain, paths turned to mud. Thomas made his way to the kitchen, where slaves gathered each morning for breakfast before being assigned their daily tasks. The large room was warm and humid, filled with the smell of cornmeal mush cooking over the fire. Esther, the elderly cook, nodded to him as he entered. "Storm's a blessing," she said quietly. "Master's not riding out to the fields today. Overseer's in a mood, though. Watch yourself." Thomas ate quickly, keeping to himself, conscious of the weight of the key in his pocket and the task ahead. He listened to nearby conversations, alert for any information that might affect his plans. "Master's leaving for Charleston tomorrow instead of today," he overheard. "The storm's delayed him. He's in a foul temper about it." Thomas's heart sank. This change could disrupt everything. If Caldwell remained at the plantation another day, when would Thomas have the opportunity to copy the documents? His opportunity came sooner than expected. Matilda appeared at the kitchen door, her expression stern but her eyes communicating urgency. "You," she said, pointing at Thomas. "Mistress says the rain's coming through that window you fixed. You're to come now and see to it." Once they were out of earshot, Matilda spoke rapidly. "Plans have changed. Master's staying until tomorrow because of the storm. Mistress says, you're to come to the study now, while he's taking breakfast in his room. You'll have an hour, maybe 2. Thomas nodded, adjusting mentally to the new timeline. "What about my other duties? Won't the overseer be looking for me?" "I've told him Mistress requested you specifically for indoor work during the storm. He wasn't happy, but he won't question her directly." Matilda paused. "Be careful, Thomas. I've known Mistress Eleanor since she came here as a bride. She's not like the others, but she's still a white woman with her own interests at heart." The warning was unexpected. "You think she'll betray me?" Matilda's expression softened slightly. "I think she believes she's doing right, but good intentions pave many dangerous roads." Thomas made his way to the main house and reached the study without encountering anyone. He knocked softly as agreed and entered when he heard Eleanor's quiet, "Come in." She stood by the window, watching the rain. She turned as he entered, her face showing relief. "You're here. Good." She moved quickly to the bookcase. "We have less time than planned. Charles has decided to delay his trip until tomorrow because of the storm." "I heard," Thomas said. "Matilda told me." Eleanor paused. "Matilda is trustworthy, but be careful what you say to her. She has her own history with my husband." Before Thomas could ask what she meant, Eleanor had opened the safe and was removing the documents. "We'll focus on the financial records today. They're the most damning and the easiest to copy quickly." She handed him the leather-bound ledger and several loose papers. "These show how he's been embezzling from my trust for years. Every entry, every figure needs to be copied exactly." Eleanor moved to the hidden room's entrance, triggering the mechanism that caused the panel to slide open. "You'll work in here. I'll keep watch and warn you if anyone approaches." Thomas stepped into the small space. The desk was prepared with paper, ink, and quills, along with a small oil lamp. "How long do I have?" he asked. 2 hours at most," Eleanor replied. "My husband is meeting with his overseer after breakfast. I'll close this panel, but I'll be in the study. 3 quick knocks means danger. Hide everything and don't make a sound." Thomas nodded, already opening the ledger. "I understand." Eleanor studied him for a moment. "Be thorough, Thomas. Our futures depend on it." With that, she closed the panel, leaving him alone in the hidden space. Thomas dipped the quill in ink and began to copy. The ledger was meticulously kept with columns of figures and notes in Caldwell's precise handwriting. The documents told a damning story. Caldwell had been systematically draining Eleanor's inheritance, diverting funds to various investments and personal expenses. There were references to property purchases in Charleston, payments to individuals identified only by initials, and large sums transferred to accounts in New York and even London. Time seemed to compress as Thomas worked, his world narrowing to the pages before him, the scratch of quill on paper and the steady drip of rain outside. He had completed nearly half the ledger when 3 sharp knocks sounded on the panel. Thomas froze. He quickly capped the ink, slid the copied pages under the blank sheets, and extinguished the lamp with a quick breath. Darkness enveloped him as he sat motionless, straining to hear what was happening in the study. Muffled voices reached him, Eleanor's light tones and a deeper male voice that must belong to Caldwell. "Simply checking that the rain hasn't damaged any of your papers, darling," he heard Eleanor saying. "And I've told you repeatedly that I prefer you not to enter without my permission." Caldwell's voice was cold. "Where is that slave who was working on the windows? Is he finished?" "I sent him to check the library windows as well," Eleanor replied smoothly. "The storm is quite severe, and I noticed water staining the curtains there this morning." There was a pause, and Thomas held his breath. "You've been acting strangely lately, Eleanor," Caldwell said finally. "Preoccupied, secretive even." "Have I?" Her voice remained steady. "Perhaps I'm simply tired of being treated like a child in my own home." Another pause, longer this time. "We'll discuss this later," Caldwell said eventually. "I have business to attend to. See that the slave is done with his work by dinner. I want him out of the house." "Of course, Charles." Footsteps receded, followed by the sound of the study door closing. A moment later, 3 soft taps on the panel. A different signal. The panel slid open, revealing Eleanor's tense face. "He's gone, but he's suspicious," she whispered. "You need to continue working. I've bought you another hour at most." Thomas nodded, relighting the lamp and returning to his task with renewed urgency. "He knows something's different," she said quietly. "I'm not sure if he suspects you specifically, or if he's just noticed a change in my behavior." "What happens if he discovers what we're doing?" Thomas asked, not looking up from his copying. "He would kill us both," Eleanor replied matter-of-factly. "Me for the betrayal. You for daring to assist me." She moved closer, watching over his shoulder as he worked. "Which is why we cannot fail." As he neared the end of the ledger, Thomas came across entries that made him pause. These payments to SP, they're regular, but smaller than the others. Eleanor glanced over. "Solomon Pike," she said quietly. "The cooperage owner I mentioned." Thomas looked up sharply. "The man you said could help me if something went wrong? Caldwell is paying him?" "It's complicated," Eleanor replied, avoiding his gaze. "Solomon has his own arrangement with my husband, but his loyalty isn't to Charles." Before Thomas could press further, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Eleanor quickly moved to the study door, opening it a crack to peer out. "It's Matilda," she whispered, relief evident in her voice. She opened the door wider, allowing the head-house slave to enter. "Master's returned to the house," Matilda reported without preamble. "He's asking for Thomas. Says he wants to inspect the window work himself." Eleanor and Thomas exchanged alarmed glances. "How much time do we have?" Eleanor asked. "Minutes at most. He's speaking with the butler now." Thomas quickly gathered the copied documents. "I'm not finished," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "It will have to be enough for now," Eleanor replied, taking the papers from him. "We'll find another opportunity." She quickly checked the originals, ensuring they were exactly as they had been, then returned them to the safe while Thomas emerged from the hidden room. Your tools, Matilda reminded him, pointing to the window where Thomas had left his toolbox. Thomas hurried to gather his things, arranging his features into a neutral expression, the mask he'd worn all his life when dealing with white people. "Where are the copies?" Thomas whispered urgently, realizing Eleanor still had them. "I'll hide them," she replied. "Go now, before he finds you here." Matilda opened the study door, checking the hallway. "Clear," she said. "Hurry." Thomas moved to leave, but Eleanor caught his arm. "Tonight," she said softly. "The servants' entrance at midnight. We need to continue." He nodded, then followed Matilda into the hallway. They had barely turned the corner when they encountered Caldwell. "Ah, there you are," he said, his cold eyes fixing on Thomas. "I want to see your handiwork on those windows." "Yes, master," Thomas replied, keeping his eyes downcast. "I was just showing him the library windows that need attention, sir," Matilda interjected smoothly, "as the mistress requested." Caldwell's gaze shifted between them, suspicion evident in his expression. "Indeed. Well, let's return to my study first. I want to ensure the work there is satisfactory." As they walked back toward the study, Thomas felt as if he were marching to his own execution. Had they left any evidence? Caldwell opened the study door without knocking, striding in as if expecting to catch someone in the act of wrongdoing. Eleanor looked up from her writing, the perfect picture of a dutiful wife occupied with correspondence. "Charles," she said, her voice betraying no anxiety, "is everything all right?" "I'm checking the window repairs," he replied curtly. "Continue with your letters." He moved to the windows, examining Thomas's work with critical eyes. Thomas stood silently, waiting for the verdict. "The caulking is uneven here," Caldwell said finally, pointing to a small section. "It will need to be redone." "Yes, master," Thomas replied, relief washing through him. "You can return tomorrow to fix it," Caldwell continued. "For now, you're dismissed." Outside, the rain had lessened to a steady drizzle. Matilda led him toward the kitchen. "That was too close," she said quietly. "Whatever you two are planning, you need to be more careful." "We are being careful," Thomas replied. "But we need more time." Matilda shook her head. "Time is the one thing you don't have. Master Caldwell isn't a fool. He senses something's off." She paused. "There's talk among the house staff. They've noticed the mistress behaving differently. Noticed you being called to the main house more often." Thomas felt a chill. "What kind of talk?" "Nothing specific yet. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves on a plantation." By the time darkness fell, the storm had passed, leaving behind a clear sky filled with stars. Thomas lay on his cot in the cabin, listening to the breathing of the other men, waiting for the plantation to fall silent. Midnight seemed an eternity away. When it was finally time, he slipped out as quietly as he had that morning. The night was cool and still, the ground muddy from the day's storm. The main house loomed before him, most windows dark except for the soft glow of a single lamp in the west wing, the signal Eleanor had promised. The servants' entrance was unlocked as Matilda had said it would be. Thomas entered, his heart pounding with each creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. He made his way to the study, following the path he had memorized earlier. The door was slightly ajar, a thin line of light spilling into the dark corridor. He knocked softly, then pushed it open. Eleanor stood by the desk, still dressed despite the late hour. Her face showed relief when she saw him. "You came," she whispered. "I wasn't sure you would." "We made a deal," Thomas replied simply. "I keep my word." She nodded, then moved to the bookcase. "We need to finish copying the ledger tonight. My husband leaves for Charleston in the morning. Once he's gone, we'll have more freedom to work on the letters." As she opened the safe, Thomas noticed something different about her demeanor, a tension beyond the usual caution. "What's wrong?" he asked as she handed him the ledger. Eleanor hesitated, then said, "Charles asked specific questions about you today, about your background, your duties, how long you'd been working in the house. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. What did you tell him? The truth, as much as possible. But he's suspicious. We need to move faster than planned. Thomas entered the small space, taking his seat at the desk where the lamp was already lit. Eleanor followed him in, closing the panel behind them. I'll stay with you, she said. It's safer if we're both here. If someone comes, neither of us will be caught in the study without explanation. The hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the scratch of quill on paper and the occasional rustle as Eleanor shifted position. As he neared the end of the ledger, he found entries that seemed to be in code, letters and numbers that made no obvious sense. Do you know what these mean? He asked, showing Eleanor the page. She moved closer, studying the entries over his shoulder. They appear to be shipment records, but I'm not certain. Copy them exactly as they are. We can decipher them later. Finally, near 3 a.m, he completed the last page. It's done, he said, flexing his cramped fingers. Eleanor took the copied pages, quickly scanning them. Excellent work. Your handwriting is remarkably similar to Charles's. Years of practice, Thomas replied, not elaborating on how he had taught himself to write by copying from books in secret. Eleanor gathered the papers into a neat stack. I'll hide these with the others. Tomorrow, after Charles leaves, we'll begin on the letters. She opened the panel cautiously, checking that the study was still empty before they emerged from the hidden room. Eleanor returned the ledger to the safe, spinning the dial to lock it. You should go now. It's almost morning. The house will be stirring soon. Thomas nodded, gathering his courage to ask the question that had been bothering him. The man you mentioned, Solomon Pike. You said he has an arrangement with your husband, but his loyalty isn't to him. What did you mean by that? Eleanor paused. Solomon was born free, but his wife wasn't. Charles helped purchase her freedom, for a price. Solomon has been paying him back ever since, not just with money, but with information. He's Charles's eyes and ears in the free black community. And yet you trust him to help me if needed? I trust him because I know his true allegiance, Eleanor replied. Solomon reports to Charles, yes, but he also reports to others, people in the North who are working against slavery. He's what some might call a double agent. Thomas absorbed this information. And you? Where do your true allegiances lie? The question was bold, but in the strange intimacy of the night, it seemed necessary. Eleanor met his gaze directly. With justice, she said simply, and with my daughter. Everything I do is to create a world where she can live freely and proudly, without the stain of her father's crimes. Before he could press further, they heard a sound from elsewhere in the house, the early stirrings of the kitchen staff beginning their day. Go, Eleanor urged. Use the west entrance. I'll see you tomorrow after Charles departs. Thomas nodded and moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. Thank you, he said quietly, for trusting me with this. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. We're trusting each other, Thomas. Our lives depend on it. With that sobering reminder, he slipped out into the hallway and made his way back to the servants' entrance. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, the first birds starting their morning songs. What he didn't know was that they were being watched. A figure stood in the shadows of the stables, observing his return to the slave cabins with keen interest. The watcher remained motionless until Thomas disappeared inside, then slipped away as silently as a ghost, carrying knowledge that could destroy everything. The morning arrived with clear skies and renewed urgency. Thomas rose early, his body aching from lack of sleep, but his mind sharp with anticipation. Today was crucial. Master Caldwell would depart for Charleston, leaving the plantation under Eleanor's supervision for 3 days. Thomas joined the other slaves for the morning meal, careful to maintain his usual demeanor. He caught Matilda's eye across the kitchen, and she gave him an almost imperceptible nod. Outside, the plantation buzzed with activity. Caldwell's carriage was being prepared, trunks loaded, horses groomed. Thomas was assigned to the tobacco fields, but he knew Eleanor would summon him once her husband departed. As he worked under the strengthening sun, Thomas kept glancing toward the main house. Finally, around mid-morning, he saw the carriage pull away, Caldwell's tall figure visible through the window. Less than an hour later, the overseer approached him in the field. "You're wanted at the main house," he said gruffly. "Mistress says there's more window work to be done. Don't know why she insists on you specifically." The man's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Yes, sir," Thomas replied, keeping his eyes downcast to hide his excitement. Eleanor was waiting in the entrance hall, dressed in a simple day gown. Several house slaves moved about their duties, but none paid particular attention to Thomas's arrival. "Thomas," Eleanor said formally, loud enough for others to hear, "the study windows still need attention, and there are several other repairs I'd like you to see to while my husband is away." "Yes, mistress," he replied with appropriate deference. She led him toward the west wing, maintaining a proper distance until they reached the study and closed the door. "He's gone," she said immediately, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We have 3 days at most." Thomas nodded, feeling the weight of time pressing upon them. "The letters you mentioned. We need to copy those next?" "Yes." Eleanor moved to the bookcase, triggering the hidden mechanism to reveal the safe. "These are perhaps even more damning than the financial records. They prove Charles has been supplying weapons to Confederate sympathizers in direct violation of federal law." She opened the safe and withdrew a bundle of letters tied with string. "These are communications between Charles and various arms dealers and Southern militias. They detail shipments, payments, and delivery locations." Thomas took the bundle, feeling their weight and significance. If these were discovered by federal authorities, Charles would hang for treason, Eleanor finished quietly, as would many of his associates. For the next several hours, Thomas sat at the small desk in the hidden room, meticulously copying letter after letter. The correspondence revealed a complex network of Confederate sympathizers still active years after the war's end. Caldwell was a central figure, using his shipping business as cover for the movement of weapons and supplies. "This name keeps appearing," Thomas noted, pointing to a signature. "General William Barton. Who is he?" Eleanor's expression darkened. "A former Confederate general who refuses to accept that the war is over. He's building a militia in western South Carolina, preparing for what he calls the Second Uprising. And your husband is supplying him with weapons? And money. Charles believes in the cause, but he's too much of a coward to fight himself. He prefers to pull strings from the safety of his plantation." By mid-afternoon, they had completed copies of more than half the letters. Eleanor suggested they take a brief break. "I should be seen giving instructions to the staff," she explained, "and you should appear to be working on other repairs. We'll continue in an hour." Thomas nodded, flexing his fingers to ease the stiffness. "Where are you hiding these?" he asked quietly, handing her the completed copies. "In a place even Charles doesn't know about," she replied. "A compartment beneath the floorboards in my private sitting room." Thomas went to the library as directed, making a show of examining the windows. Matilda appeared a short time later with food. "Be careful," she whispered as she set down the tray. "The butler is asking questions about why you're spending so much time in the West Wing." Thomas felt a chill of apprehension. "What kind of questions?" "Wondering why the mistress keeps requesting you specifically. He's loyal to the master, that one." After finishing his meal, Thomas made his way back to the study. Eleanor was already there. "The butler is suspicious," Thomas said without preamble. Eleanor looked up sharply. "How do you know?" "Matilda warned me. He's been asking why you keep requesting me specifically." Eleanor frowned. "I suspected as much. Jenkins has always been Charles's creature. We'll need to be more careful." They returned to their work, the letters revealing plans for targeted attacks on government officials and freed slaves who had gained positions of influence. "These aren't just the bitter ramblings of defeated men," Thomas observed grimly. "This is a coordinated effort to undermine Reconstruction." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, "and my husband is at the center of it. Not as a leader, he lacks the courage for that, but as a financier and supplier." Eleanor paused, seeming to consider whether to say more. "There's something else you should know, Thomas. Something I haven't told you yet." Before she could continue, they heard the study door opening. They froze, Eleanor quickly extinguishing the lamp. "Mistress," came the butler's voice, "are you in here?" They remained perfectly still. Footsteps moved about the study, then paused near the bookcase. "Strange," the butler muttered. "I was certain I saw her come this way." Finally, they heard the study door close again. Only then did Eleanor relight the lamp, her hands trembling slightly. "That was too close," she whispered. "He must have followed me." They worked with renewed urgency. By early evening they had finished all the letters. "Now we wait for my contact to arrive, the man who will take these documents north," Eleanor explained. "He's expected tomorrow evening. Once he has these papers, events will move quickly." "You should go," Eleanor said, checking the time. "It's nearly dinner, and your absence will be noticed if you remain here longer." As Thomas prepared to leave, Eleanor caught his arm. "Be careful, Thomas. The butler's suspicions make everything more dangerous." "I understand," he replied. "And what about what you were going to tell me? Before we were interrupted?" Eleanor hesitated. "Tomorrow. It's better if you know everything before my contact arrives." Outside, Thomas had just passed the kitchen garden when a voice called to him. "Thomas." He turned to find Samuel, the elderly man who tended the horses, sitting beneath an oak tree. "Come sit a moment," Samuel said. Thomas joined him, setting his toolbox on the ground. "You've been busy at the big house," Samuel observed. "Yes," Thomas replied cautiously. "Mistress has had me fixing windows." Samuel nodded slowly. "Windows. Important things. Windows. Let light in, let you see out." He turned his gaze to Thomas. "Sometimes they let you see things you ain't meant to see." "I'm just doing what I'm told," Thomas said carefully. Samuel's weathered hand came to rest on Thomas's arm. "Your daddy was a brave man. Too brave, some said. That's why they sold him away." He paused. "I see him in you, that same fire, that same yearning." "Listen to me, boy," Samuel continued. "Whatever you're involved in, whatever you're planning, be careful who you trust. On a plantation, walls have ears and shadows have eyes. White folks' quarrels have a way of falling hardest on black backs." With that cryptic warning, Samuel rose and walked away, leaving Thomas troubled by the encounter. What Thomas didn't know was that at that very moment, a rider was galloping toward Charleston, carrying a message that would upend all their careful plans. The butler had been watching, and what he had seen had prompted him to take action. Action that would set in motion events beyond anyone's control.